Welcome back, Curious Hearts. I'm Vera. Together, in every episode, we get to explore what it is we really believe, how we practice, and we get to meet people who are on their own spiritual path. Together, we begin. Y'all, welcome back. I am so excited to introduce you to my friend and my colleague, Denise Hancock. Denise and I met in an astrology training course several years ago now. And I have to admit that when I need an astrologer, Denise is the person that I call. But like many consulting astrologers, she has a whole other life. We were talking before I hit record about her jobby job. She works as a nurse educator and has worked in a number of different ways, training the next generation of nurses. And so I'm really excited about our conversation today. And I wonder, Denise, is there anything that you want to share before we get started?
Thank you, Vera. I'm so excited to be here. I don't think there's anything I particularly wanted to share before we get started. I'm just really looking forward to the conversation. I've been listening to your podcast since it began and really love the content and many of the guests that you've had on. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. So I'll start you where we start everybody, which is tell me a little bit about what your family was like growing up and if there was a spiritual or religious flavor there.
Sure. I grew up in rural Oklahoma, where my family had actually been for a couple of generations. So my family is very rooted in small town Oklahoma. And my parents had me when they were quite young, 20. And my mother is a very devout Christian. She belongs to a church which I would liken to, it's very fundamental and evangelical. And her Christian life is really important to her, as it was to my grandmother and my great-grandmother, and she is really a servant to her church community. You know, she's the kind of person who sits with everyone who's sick. If there's a funeral, she's there with food. You know, she's really relied upon as like a core worker of the church.
Yeah.
So one way or another, she married my father, who was a total atheist. And so my childhood was very much that myself and my younger brother and I went to church with my mother every Sunday morning. We went to Bible class, you know, we did church camps, and my father never participated in any of it. And it was a little confusing to me as a kid, and he would often say, we had to go to church because we needed to learn how to behave, but he already knew how to behave, and so it was like not for him.
I guess that's one way to explain it to kids.
That's the only explanation I can remember, you know. And my mother, I think it's always been a source of heartache to my mother that my father would never go to church. Like, I think she's been praying for him for, you know, nearly 60 years now that he would go, but he just hasn't. He refuses, and he's not really even open to the conversation.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So you grew up inside of, I mean, that's a pretty... I was having a conversation with some folks who were all over the country yesterday from different religious backgrounds. And I was trying to sort of explain to them, I was like, churches in Louisiana like are different than churches in California, right? What was it like for you as a little girl growing up in that kind of evangelical, right? Like I think of like Oklahoma, I'm assuming Southern, you know, lots, maybe conservative?
Very conservative. So the town that I lived in itself, like in, you know, so the people I went to school with was largely Southern Baptist. I truly didn't meet a person who was Jewish until like I went away to college. Like there were no Catholics there. There were no other religions except for like pretty conservative Christian. There was a United Methodist Church, and I think that's about as liberal as it got.
Wow. Okay.
So my mother's church is interesting because it's called Church of the Firstborn, and there's no central governing body. So every congregation kind of abides by that individual preacher's teaching. Okay. And so some segments of my family were what I would consider to be ultra conservative, to the point where as a kid I had cousins who, like, the girls weren't allowed to cut their hair and they had to wear dresses, and people didn't go to the doctor, and you
Yeah, like
know.
listening to music, dancing, that's off
Yes.
the table. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Now, my particular congregation was a little bit more liberal, but it was really confusing because then we would go visit my cousins where, life was, very, very different, very, very conservative. And I can remember having conversations with family where, like, my cousins would be like, oh, well, your family's going to hell because, XYZ, we went to the doctor or
Right, you're right. And I'd always imagine like, what is that as a kid? Like, you're going to hell because you went to the doctor is like one of the
yeah.
most confusing pieces of information.
Yes, yes. And as I've gotten older, I hear less judgment, but I still have family that, are very much in those belief systems. And in fact, I had a cousin die this summer who refused to seek medical care. And so, she probably had endometrial cancer that could have been really easily fixed, but it was outside, of her belief system.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thank you. It's puzzling, but I also do, as a nurse, I honor that people have autonomy and that everybody has to make their own decisions. It gets a whole lot harder when you think about, children's health care and other things, but for an adult,
For sure.
yeah, it makes sense.
For sure. So that was, and did you believe in God as a little girl? Like, did that,
I
all of that
did.
just sort of worked?
Yeah. In fact, I had like a children's Bible that had illustrations, and I think I read it like 6 or 7 times. Like I really knew all the stories of the Old
Yeah.
Testament and the New Testament, and I had friends, at the church, and as a middle school and teen, up until probably about the age of 16, I would go on Sunday night and Wednesday night and was very active with youth until probably about the age of 16 or 17 when I started having a part-time job and just being more active in high school where I traveled a lot and it became less of a part of my life.
Okay, so it was more just about like the logistics and like where your time was going and less
Hmm.
about like, okay.
Now things changed more dramatically once I got to college, but
Right.
but
And
yeah,
that's, of course,
yeah.
the next question is that I am sure your childhood, evangelical church would really be excited about you being an astrologer.
Yeah. And well, in fact, my mother sort of, I guess, tries to avoid the topic generally, right? Like, yes, they have, I don't know that everyone does, but there certainly were some strong beliefs about what was allowed or what wasn't allowed.
Yeah.
And particularly a lot about gender roles. That probably bothered me more than anything, even as a child. Like, rules about what women could do and couldn't do. I always chafed against
Sure.
at every age, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, I don't mean to minimize the importance like of a church community, right? I think part of me is like pulling on my own experience. Like what I did not realize until I started teaching yoga and teaching yoga specifically in at Odyssey House and in less, traditional yoga communities,
Uh-huh.
that for many people practicing yoga was off limits entirely. That
Hmm.
that meditation in some very conservative, I think Baptist churches, but don't quote me, meditation is considered as like something that's opening you up to demonic possession. And the first time I heard that, I was like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
And when I tell other people that, they often are like, time out. But that goes back to the like, right, like churches in the South are different than churches in California.
Well, and there's this perception that anything that isn't exactly like us is
Yeah.
totally wrong and of the devil, right? Like we
Yeah.
have the one right way and there's no other right ways and everyone else has it wrong. And so I heard many kind of strange versions of what different religions stood for as a kid that then of course once I became exposed to people and realized that was not, the
Yeah.
reality of the world.
So what was that like? So you went to college
Hmm.
and suddenly then you're exposed to all sorts of different people. What was that? Was there a process there for you?
Yeah.
Wait, I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm going to pause. I think Delilah is having a moment. I'm going to open the door for her. She usually doesn't cry. Sorry, she's been scratching on the door and scratching on the door, and I was like, I don't know what's happening. And then she made her, I really have to go to the bathroom noise. So,
It's okay.
um, okay, I'm going to start that again. So, then you go to college
Hmm.
and you are exposed to a whole bunch of, different kinds of people with different belief systems. Like, what was that like?
I think it actually started a little earlier because, again, I went to college in Oklahoma. So there were a lot of people with very similar backgrounds in the at least the early days, like in my dorm life. But I did take a religion class, I want to say in my very first year of university. And that was really eye-opening to me, when we actually talked about the history and the origins and the beliefs of different faiths. And I was like, oh, this all makes sense, and I understand it more. And I think as I began to get more knowledge, it kind of made me really aware of how kind of ignorant and uninformed a lot of the people that had taken on the role of teachers and preachers and ministers and leaders were wrong, that they simply didn't know. And I would say even today, I'll sometimes go to church with my mom when I return home because it makes her very happy, and
Sure.
more than anything, I think there's just, it's a place where people tended to believe exactly what their parents told them and their teachers told them, and there wasn't really questioning, and there's not really a lot of formal education. But it is a really strong community, and I know it really has been a great source of comfort from my mother.
Yeah.
Um, but
And
it is not for
belonging.
me. Yeah, and belonging, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting, like the way that you describe it. There's a part of me that goes like, "Oh, right. You don't know what you don't know."
No.
It's not like very often. It's not an intentional. Oh, well, we won't tell them that. So
Yeah.
anyway, so what how do you think of your spiritual life now as an adult? Like, what is that on a day to day basis like?
I don't know that I mean, this may not surprise you, but I don't know that I've ever settled on any firm answers, right? Is an astrologer named Carolyn Casey who wrote, Believe Nothing, Consider All Possibilities. And I think that's probably where I am at in my spiritual life. I absolutely believe that we're all connected and that we're part of a divine or a large, a universal consciousness. But I also think that perhaps it is unknowable to
Yeah.
us as humans. And so I really veer away from having any defined answers about that
Hmm.
and try to explore different things and sort of find, you know, what helps. I have, as an astrologer, I'll say I have a lot of earth in my chart. And so
Okay.
it's like I'm here in this body on this earth having this material experience, and I've got to figure out how to navigate the day. Like, so what
Yeah.
sorts of practices help me take care of my body, help me navigate, the day, help me to sort of live in the values that I think are important with the people around me.
Yeah.
And so there's probably a mishmash of things rather than any one specific tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's so interesting because I think you are naming the thing that is sort of at the core of spirituality, which is that I think that in many ways, like religion answers questions for us
Hmm.
and spirituality just asks them,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like, okay, there's this unknowable thing, there's this mystery, and it would be impossible to try to understand it or to pledge my devotion to one particular thing with certainty. And so I really appreciate you just like naming that. I'm curious. Okay, I don't think that I've talked about astrological magic with anybody
Mm.
because I think that you're the first person to come on the podcast who I know has extensive practice in it. And you know that astrological magic is something that I have dabbled in a little bit. I'm nowhere near, I think, as experienced as you are. For those of you who are listening, like how much do I say? Uh, the quality of time is sort of how we're evaluating astrology. Like when you look at an astrological chart, I think of it. It sort of like tells the like what the time is going to feel like. The clock tells us what actual time is, right? Astrology says, okay, how's it going to feel? And astrological magic is a way of taking a snapshot of a moment, taking that quality of time and sort of permanently imbuing it into an object or into, into a ceremony or something like that. So that's the rough background. Do you ever think about, what is the question I want to ask you? I sometimes feel an inner conflict between what I say I believe about how astrology works and this what also feels really reassuring to me of like practicing astrological magic or being aware of like astrological timing. What is your take on that?
That's such a big question, really.
I know. Oh, I should have warned you probably.
No,
but I
it's
didn't
okay.
even know it was going to happen.
I mean, essentially it goes back to, you had one of our teachers earlier on, Sam Reynolds, on the
Yeah.
podcast. If someone hasn't listened to that, I highly recommend it. And he talks often about like fate and free will, right? And so there are some people who see astrology as a machine of fate, essentially, casting things out. And anytime you practice magic in any way, whether it's through astrology or other forms of magic, you're saying, no, this is my free will, right? And I'm somehow manipulating the system, right? Or I'm rigging the system. I'm changing my fortune to some
Yeah.
degree, which is fascinating, I think, because when you read a lot of positive psychology, which I'm very much a fan of, one could argue it's truly magic, right? Or even cognitive behavioral therapy, right? It's like by changing your thoughts, you change your reality. And
I
so,
like that's interesting.
yeah, so to some degree, could that be how astrological magic works? I mean, perhaps it could be.
Yeah.
Like a placebo medication, right? In fact, it's funny, as we talk, I have a Mercury talisman in front of me, right? And so at a moment when the planet Mercury was very strong in Gemini, I did a ceremony to sort of imbue, that planet into essentially this rock, right? And I carry the rock and I carry it with me when I drive. And sometimes I carry it with me when I'm speaking, right? And it's my belief that this helps me to arrive safely and swiftly and smoothly to where I want to go and to, use the right words at the right time to communicate things. So, yeah, it's one of those things that I think you struggle with of like, do we have influence? Can we have influence? And if so, I think astrology is just another way of like using that influence. And of course, part of astrological magic is capturing a moment in time, and part of it is the belief that there is a spirit associated with the planet and that spirit can imbue something, right?
Yeah. 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 And I have to be honest, like when there was a period of time where I was doing some like dedicated Jupiter practices, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would like, Thursday morning, Sunday night, there's like specific times of the week that
Mm-hmm.
you do those rituals and offer prayers and like make requests. And of course there's like, there's a little, I don't know if it's a little demon on my shoulder, but a little Jupiter and Virgo on my shoulder going, what is it that you think you're like, are you talking to a planet? Are you really talking to a planet right now?
Different from other deities, really. I mean,
Right.
whether it's, whatever pantheon of deities, it's like we have many names for
Yeah.
characteristics or components of this larger,
Yeah.
divine creator. And so perhaps when one is, praying to Venus, what you're really praying for, or the ideas about, relational harmony or,
Yeah.
you know, physical beauty, aesthetics, creativity, right? That part
Yeah.
of the divine. I don't know.
And
In the end I come to, does it make me feel better? Like, does it help me navigate my day-to-day life? And the answer is for me, yes. And only recently have I actually, most of my astrological magic practice has been really just solo, right? Like me in my house, me in a space. And just this year, I've had the opportunity to do some things that were in the company of others, where there were like 3 or 4 people, and we did the ritual. And in a bit like church, or in like being at Kirtan, right?
mm-hmm.
There's a wonderful feeling that you get from doing that, where you really do feel connected and as those spirits are present with you. And so that's pretty wonderful.
Yeah, and yeah, ceremony. The interesting thing about doing the podcast is like I realize how many spiritual practices I left out of my initial list,
Uh-huh.
and that like that ceremony and ritual are a really important part. Not because yes, you can do them on your own, or just with your body, your
Hmm.
personal body. Like maybe there's some disembodied energies that are happening there. But there is something that happens when more than one person starts to engage in that process and that
Yeah.
practice that is sort of, it doesn't, there is a difference for me between performing an elopement and performing a wedding ceremony where there are like where the whole community is present.
Wow, yeah.
And I don't want to say that one is better than the other because I don't think they are, but the energy of those two things is different.
Yeah, no, I've enjoyed doing that. So yeah, I don't know if I directly answered your question other than, I too have struggled at it and I tend to explore through things through different lenses to kind of come to a place where I feel secure enough,
Yeah.
knowing that my views could change in time, but that's where I am now.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the things that draws me to you always, and it's my experience of you as an astrologer and a person, is you have a way of presenting concepts that otherwise could be really esoteric in really grounded, practical ways without shedding the like esoteric or the spiritual element to it, if that makes sense, right?
That's such a
And
that's such a lovely thing to say. Thank you.
you're welcome. But I think that most people, I mean, and it's somewhere that I struggle, especially with astrology readings, like, where I'm just like, I don't know, I'm just like off in another stratosphere. Like, and I'm constantly going, like, I don't know, how do we bring this back to reality? I'm not really sure. I think that it's very easy to find one, someone who's like very practical, very like, this is what's happening and these are the like nuts and bolts, or to find somebody who's like, off on another planet, and very rare to feel that like the energy of the both combined. And so it's one of the reasons I was excited to have you, because I was like, oh good, we get to talk about like really spiritual stuff in a really grounded way. I don't think I've ever asked you this before either, but I'm curious how your professional life has influenced your understanding of spirit.
I'm really glad that you asked me that question. I'm gonna get there by weaving a little bit. I've always been interested in astrology, and so in many times in my life, I would get some books or I would do a thing, and then, life intervenes and I didn't do it for a while. And so around the time that I had a 10-year career in finance and investments and money management before I became a nurse. When I was in that transition period between getting ready to go to nursing school, I met a woman who doesn't live here anymore, but she used to live in New Orleans, and she did some energy work, like learning groups. It wasn't like a formal Reiki training, but energy. And I did that around the time I started nursing school. And so one of the first organizations I joined in nursing school was the American Holistic Nurses Association.
Hmm.
And they are very interested in spirituality as part of nursing practice, the science of energy. Astrology is actually a recognized specialty in the American Holistic Nurses Association, as is like,
That's awesome.
yeah, acupressure. Yeah, I
Yeah,
have a good friend who in Oregon, she has a private nursing practice and she uses astrology as a diagnostic tool.
love that.
Yeah, so going out of nursing school, my very first nursing work was as a high risk maternal newborn nurse. And so I took care of most of the time women who were pregnant who had some kind of complication, trauma, surgery, medical, whatever, psychological. And so I learned really quickly that in order to really effectively serve that population, I had to be grounded and I had to use like all of my tools. we often tried to avoid medications. And so learning to use energy healing, to use aromatherapy, to like have practices of,
Mm.
I had a little prayer I'd pray every time I pulled into the parking lot and parked, and at each door I would like stop and like take a breath and center myself because I learned that my patients did better when I did that. Like if I didn't do those things, the night would turn into chaos and things would go wrong. And it's like patients would feed off of my
Yeah.
frustration or confusion, etc. And
Wow.
so it really drove home to me, like in that concrete, practical way, that those practices make a difference. And I still use them now with my faculty, students, etc. But like learning how to sort of go into your spiritual space as you interact with another human being generally makes that interaction go better.
I love that you named that because it's the thing that I want to talk to my coaching clients about more, and that I'm often a little nervous, right? Because in the most obvious sense, right? If somebody comes to me as a, looking for a career transition, they're worried about all sorts of very practical things. And I have an internalized bias away from bringing forward the spiritual work. I mean, I still do it, but this is the other thing that I'm feeling particularly excited about right now is working with leaders and professionals into like how to integrate their spiritual life and spiritual practice into their everyday work for exactly that reason. Right? The one of my favorite little spiritual books is called Always We Begin Again. And
Hmm.
it's like this little teeny guy like this. And it's, maybe 40 pages, but it was written by a monk. And he talks about like, okay, we wake up and pray at this moment, and then we go to work, and then we stop and pray here, and then we stop and pray here, and then we stop and pray here. And I'm like, right, this is not like it's not a first thing in the morning and last thing at the end of the day. It's not a once a week on Sunday morning thing. Like that sense of like spiritual nourishment, I think becomes more important when we are under more stress, right? When we have more responsibility, when we have more weight on our shoulders. And I kind of can't imagine having more weight on my shoulders than like brand new babies and
Yeah.
moms who are in that really vulnerable place.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely an intense learning experience that I did for a few
Yeah.
years before I moved into education.
Yeah.
But I think the reality of the world now is no matter where people are working, like we deal with people in crisis all the time, you know.
Yeah.
And so any skill set that you can develop that helps you come to your interactions with others in a way where you can be more grounded and you can, attempt to really have them compassion for them and to see them for who they are and to listen to them, it makes the workplace go better,
Yeah.
Not that it's always possible, but it's definitely helpful and people tend to respond to that really well.
Yeah. It's like it doesn't solve every problem,
Hmm.
but uh, it might lower the volume on the loud problems, and it might like head off at the pass something that might, that otherwise could blow up. I think
Yeah.
it's a good segue
Hmm.
into like the second part of our conversation, which is really like what your spiritual life looks like in practice. So like when you think today about your spiritual practices, is there one that is really anchoring you, that is grounding you in that way?
This is going to sound so basic and practical, but literally getting up in the morning and having 30 minutes to myself where I do reflect upon what's the astrology of the day, what's the moon doing, what's the energy, and um, writing down an affirmation. This is the month of August and we're in the middle of eclipse season. And so I've really been focused this month on a mantra of compassion And so as I drive to work in the morning, I've been doing that mantra, every morning on my way, which is kind of funny. I found myself the other day actually feeling overly compassionate for hackers, which was not good at all. I was laughed at myself. I'm like, okay, I think I've taken this compassion meditation like a little too far,
Gone. Oh, yes, and I know I'm about to say a really like sort of controversial thing that I said to some other folks yesterday, that like in the world that we're in right now, like so much of the system is dehumanizing all of us, right? Some of us are more harmed by that than others, but that like a world in which you're hacking because, right? It's like finding that like that you can be compassionate and still hold people responsible for their behavior.
Yeah. Well, and I laughed and I thought, okay, well, that's silly. There's been thieves and, whatever throughout history, right? Like,
Sure.
But now it's digital. But having that time to like really think about what's the day going to be like? What do I want the day to be like? How I can come into the day is helpful for me. I know for people that have like small children and stuff, that might be a really huge thing to even have, 20 or 30 minutes alone in your day. But
Sure.
I feel really lucky that I'm able to do that. And it makes a big difference in my day than if I try to like just run out and approach the day without giving myself some space.
And I will tell you, I often think about the privilege of living alone and being in control of my time. And I have both friends and clients who have said the most important thing I do is get up half an hour before my before my kids do, so that I know I'm going to have 30 minutes of time for myself to tend to my inner needs before, the chaos of the day begins.
Yeah.
So I love that you described too and like shared with us like exactly what you do inside of that time, because I think it's really helpful for people to have specific answers.
And it'll vary by season, but like
that was my next question.
I don't intentionally do one thing a month or one thing a season, but kind of as, the issues of your life change, like the thing I need in the morning to do will change slightly. But I do always, try to give myself that time in the morning to be reflective and to be intentional. Because, the rest of the day may be totally out of your control, right? But at least can kind of start off there.
Yeah, I mean, starting with intention is like really, it's one of the most powerful things I think we can do. Because it sets the tone in terms of what you notice throughout the course of the day, right?
For sure. Yeah.
You already started to answer the question that I wanted to ask, just for my own curiosity. After doing some of your new moon rituals, like I also have experienced, you working with like developing mantra for the seasons. Are those based entirely on like the transits that are happening outside, or do you also reflect on kind of how it's impacting your chart or like where you are in your own sort of season of life?
I actually don't really individualize them so much to my own transits. I do make conscious decisions about my own transits. I'm about to have my second Saturn return, right? And so I've consciously been trying to make good decisions around fortifying my body and my health, because a lot of times, you start to really notice aging concerns, right? And so that's been a long-term thing. But no, I don't think I so much take that into consideration. And part of that may be because I am currently working a full-time job where I have 600 students and 20 full-time employees. And so it's kind of easier for me to manage me than like all the energy that's swirling around me, right? And so, I had a number of people who used to come to my new moon workshops who were teachers, and they always can tell what's going on in the cosmos because children like act it out, right? Like, so if it's a crazy time with the planets, the kids are going to be wild and crazy, right? And so you kind of get that at a university level too, right? It's like, more drama, more, emergencies, more, complaints, more. And so I have a harder time like getting myself in the right headspace to be a good leader and to set a good example than really like necessarily what's going on in my personal life.
That makes so much sense. So yeah, it's really just like, okay, what do you see about what's happening in the world and how do I want to meet that
Yeah.
rather than yeah. Yeah, and that too is like really I mean that's the core of intention, right? Is like how do I want to show up to this? Oh, I love that. Okay, you're giving me lots of ideas for things that I wish I were doing differently.
There's always
Um,
tomorrow.
yeah, exactly. I mean, boy,
There's
that's
always
the
tomorrow.
thing. And I love having practices I can go back to again and again that I have a long relationship with, and I also like working with new practice, right? Because it's sort of like I don't know, like our spiritual life is like it's like a lifetime relationship, and so sometimes it needs to be spiced up a little bit. So sometimes it's nice to have some variety, I think.
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure, go ahead.
I don't know if this is a topic that you want to dive into, but I've been thinking a lot lately about this notion of people, manifestation is all the rage. And it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
along the lines of, astrological magic or even positive psychology, but where like what are your thoughts or ideas around that topic?
So you've already touched on it a little bit. I have mixed feelings is where I will start first because so much of my spiritual life has been about learning how to tune into whatever we might call it, right? The like frequency of the universe, like turning into a radio station, being connected with my, spirit team, my guides, my ancestors, building connection with a power greater than myself and seeking guidance for like where I should go. So my hesitation, I think, around most manifestation practices is that I have learned that my ego, my ego's ideas of the way my life is supposed to be has not served me very well. It has often brought me a lot of, like, the hardest part is that I'm an incredibly, like, I'm stubborn and I'm relatively, like, I have some decent capacity and, like, I'm like, I can, like, do stuff.
Uh-huh.
And so I have, on more than one occasion, I have literally worked myself to the point of not just burnout, but, like, breakdown. So I know that that's possible. And that comes from that that pushing and pushing and pushing and making something happen comes from a very egoic place inside me. So that's like the first caveat is that like I am always cautious around practices that would be tasty for my ego.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's the reason that I like astrological magic, to be honest, is it's the closest that I can get to manifestation where I'm still like, seeking the like, if we were turning towards Venus, for example, right? Like, help me be open to like the extraordinary power of human connection. Help me see the beauty that exists all around me. Guide me towards the place that you would have me be in relationship rather than Venus, I'm gonna make you a list of the person
Yeah.
I would like to meet.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so that's always my first. Like I'm always cautious about manifestation triggering an ego state. But that aside, I am not like a deep devotee to any of the sort of manifestation folks, but there's a guy who is his name is not going to come to me, but he wrote a book called Becoming Supernatural. And he's he may even have a medical background or and he writes all about the like complicated like particle physics and all of this
Uh-huh.
stuff. And there are a lot of folks who are very intellectual and very smart who I think have keyed into this. But his first book apparently was, I think, called The Placebo Effect. And his argument, and so it's like where you're already there, right? The argument is we know it is documented medical philosophy, like documented medical evidence. It's not just that people think they are getting better. People are getting better. it is not like they're tricking themselves into something. That when people believe that what they are taking is there to help them, some part of their system is moving them in that direction. And his argument is like, so if we can do that from a medical standpoint, like, why not experiment with this in another way? So that, I think that's probably the closest place that I would fall on, like, inside of manifestation. Again, like, I don't, for my own well-being, I try not to engage too much in it. And like, do I have a Jupiter talisman like carved into the concrete outside? Yes, I sure do. When they came to repave my sidewalk, is that superstition? Maybe, but it also is like when I'm coming back home from somewhere and I happen to peep, right, the Jupiter talisman and Jupiter symbol, I go like, okay, yeah, right, this is a place where lucky things happen. Mm-hmm. And so going back to that question of like intentionality and the power of directing our attention at things, it's like when I am looking for good fortune and like for the lucky and beneficial things that have happened to me, I notice more of them. And then I believe they're more likely to happen, right? Then it becomes this like self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's about as far as I think about it anymore, to be honest.
And I think because I talk with, lots of people in the astrology realm and who do lots of esoteric stuff, on one hand, I don't think an ego-led cosmic shopping list is the point of manifestation. On the other hand, I can absolutely think about, when I was 20 years old, I wrote down a list of like all these things I wanted to do. Most of them are done, right? Most of them have happened, right? And so I've decided that perhaps I'm limiting myself too much in some ways. So I currently at the moment have a picture of Apollo's temple at Delphi on my phone. And I'm writing every day about a wonderful trip I'm taking to Greece next year, where I have literally no actual plans to do it yet, but we'll see. I'm convinced it's going to happen. And I recall that several years ago in my life, I manifested a free trip to Peru in that way of like, I just kept saying, oh, I'm going to go to Peru next year. And, so we'll see. But I also kind of go back and forth between I can push too hard and I can really make wrong choices and dedicate a lot of efforts to things that aren't really meaningful. On the other hand, are all of our desires holy? Right. I don't know, right? I don't know.
Yeah. And like, I think it's the other thing I have experienced, and like maybe there's some like I'm sure there's some balance here.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that like I've heard folks who teach manifestation talk about is that like, you just focus on the what, you don't think about the how.
The how.
Like focus on how it feels, what the, and in a lot of ways like I think that work is also really important because, and like as a coach, it's incredibly important because for example, if somebody's like been working in the same soul-sucking job for 15 years, not only are they so burnt out, but they're so experienced, like they're so practiced with that routine of being exhausted, of work being totally exploitative, of like, all of the things that go with that, right? Like that it's impossible for them to imagine a work environment that isn't toxic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so having some of that like embodied visioning practice of like what something that like that could feel like can be really useful. And I have used that for sure with clients. So it's not to say that I don't ever do any of it. The other thing that I have noticed is, and like this is the selfish thing, is me 15 years ago when I was in the soul-sucking job, right?
Uh-huh.
Like with the toxic boss and the whatever, I would never have imagined a life like the one I have now, right? Like I couldn't have conceived of it enough to even try to manifest it. And so part of me is like, I don't know. I think that my scope is too limited.
Too small.
Yeah.
I'm
sort of like, I have some like imagery or some visions that come forward about like what my future might be. And I sometimes I'm like, I have no idea how that will ever happen, but like, I trust you. You just keep telling me what to do. I'll show up, do the
Yeah.
next right thing, and like, we'll see what unfolds. But what I love about having conversations like this is that like, I don't need everybody else to do it that way, you know? And I'm like, I really want you to go to Greece.
Well, and I really wanted to have this conversation with somebody who's not trying to sell me a course in manifestation, right? And who approaches life with a bit of humility and openness to, you
Yeah.
know, what is my purpose? What is my path? And what are my core values? That, I know you're not a
Yeah.
person who's like, my core value is I want to be a millionaire and I want to sell a million people my course to manifest
Yeah.
their dreams.
Sometimes I wish I wish I would have a really successful cult if I aspired, right? Like there's
Mhm.
some days that I wish like that
Mhm.
I was more attached to material things, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
What I do find, and thank you for saying those things about me. I really one of the most valuable things for me about this process, and I'm giving a talk next week that it's related to this. And I was like, right, the values that we come to through the course of our spiritual life are in some ways like the fruit of the practice, I think. And so I'm wondering, like, inside of all of this, like, is there a spiritual principle or like a value that's really been holding things together for you lately?
You sent me the list of questions you usually ask, and I've listened to podcasts before. So this is something I actually kind of reflected on as I was traveling over the weekend. And I've worked in organizations and I've been board members where we had to like state our values, right? And on my personal website, you can read about some of my values as an astrologer. And so those things are all true, right? I value every person's autonomy and I respect individuals. But I was thinking about like, well, what is my core spiritual value? And I think in some ways, it's the idea of being a steward, that I take the concept of stewardship really seriously in every part of my life. Maybe more
Mm,
than I ought to for my own well-being and happiness, but being a source of responsible care for what is given to me, whether it's through a formal work role or for my family or my dog or my community, but acting in ways that promote the long-term well-being of others, I
yeah.
think is probably one of my core spiritual values. And so maybe stewardship isn't exactly the right word, but that's what came to me as I was reflecting on it.
Yeah, and I love it I really love that as a word and like as a concept, especially because stewardship acknowledges that we don't own it,
Hmm.
but it is our responsibility to care for, right? Like here's this thing that we're going to inherit and we take excellent care of it, and then it will, we don't get to
Right.
sink our claws in. And that like non-attachment to, I mean, I would imagine as an educator, that is like a many year long, like hard won experience.
Yeah, but I think if you follow the thread through my life, you would have seen it emerge even early on as a teenager and then in my finance career as well. Like, I really
Yeah.
loved when what my work was truly working with like small business owners to help them think, well, what is it I want my company to look like? How do I want to take care of my
Yeah.
employees? How do I want to take care of my family? Um, and so managing people's money and helping them make decisions around money was one way of doing that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then it became more of a health focus. And now it's more of a like, well, what do you want for your education, your career? How are you going to help others
Yeah.
in that way? But yeah, I feel like it's a thread that perhaps it's my own design of my natal chart, right? Like that it seems to be my role in life
Yeah.
is to be in some way or form a steward of
Yeah. And
others.
I really like that. Yeah. I really like it, the framing, because it's different than like caretaking or giving, right? Caregiving,
Mm-hmm.
right? Stewardship is a different energy. It is caring for something as if it is your own without attachment to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or without needing to get any better. I mean, it sounds to me sort of like the definition of service too, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you familiar at all with, I think is Stefan Schwartz?
Mm-mm.
He's a really interesting psi researcher. He was the person who helped design the Navy's remote viewing experiments, like back in the
Mm-hmm.
1950s. And without talking about all his current body of work, because you can look him up online, he talks about he thinks at this point in our civilization and our culture and what's ahead, like we all need a much greater focus on collective well-being.
Yeah.
Like, can everything we do promote well-being? And of course, none of us can do it every single day, right? Whether it's deciding, where you buy groceries or how you get shoes or, all those things. But holding that in the back of your mind of like, how do we promote the long-term well-being of everyone, as a
Yeah.
collective, is largely what's missing, in what seems to be missing in our leadership and our politics. And so,
Yeah. And in a worldview,
hmm
right? Not even worldview, but it's like our system is set up so that we're really only thinking about, best case scenario, the next 12 months, right?
hmm
But like what you have, like your quarterly earnings
hmm
calls, right? That it's
hmm
like, why would you why would you prioritize what is actually best for the long-term growth and sustainability when you're being measured for every 3 months? And it reminds me of the, right, it's like there's a traditional, I don't know which tribe it is, but it's sort of like a traditional like Native American concept of like that every decision we make is we make it in mind of the next 7 generations,
yeah, I heard that also.
right? And like that's what I think about when I think about stewardship,
Mm.
right? It's like, how can I care for this thing on behalf of people I will never know and who will never know me? And like yeah, it's like there's like real responsible care, he said, is really, yeah, I think we all would benefit from that. Thank you so much. What a
You're welcome.
sweet conversation. Is there anything coming up or anything that you'd like to share with folks before we wrap up?
Astrology wise, I'm headed to the United Astrology Conference in
Yay.
Chicago in a couple of weeks. So if anyone listening is there, by all means look for me. Denise Hancock. I am a member of the Organization for Professional Astrologers, and so I will be at that vendor table at least a couple hours every day. In New Orleans, I'm teaching a Foundations for Astrology course. And, throughout the year, I have various either in person or online offerings that are at my website. So anyone's welcome to check that out. And nursing's still really important to me, too. Just, different pathway. Yeah. So on to the September term in that regard.
Yeah, you're about to start a whole new,
Hmm
yeah, is it? He's just kind of like, yeah, it's like it's charging up. Yeah, as I said before, when I need an astrologer, Denise is who I call.
Thank you,
So
Vera.
it is my pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, Curious Hearts. If this episode was useful, I hope you'll follow the show or leave a review or share it with somebody who you think needs it. And if you're craving support on your own spiritual path or seeking some meaningful work, you can find ways to work with me at veralester.com. Otherwise, until next time, please stay grounded in that curiosity that you've got and keep turning towards what matters. See y'all soon.